his clothes, I shall be cured. Immediately her flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Jesus, aware at once the power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who has touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see how the crowd is pressing upon you, and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, realizing what had happened to her, approached in fear and trembling. She fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction." While he was still speaking, people from the synagogue official's house arrived and said, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" Disregarding the message that was reported, Jesus said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid, just have faith." He did not allow anyone to accompany him inside except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they arrived at the house of the synagogue official, he caught sight of the commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. So he went in and said to them, "Why this commotion and weeping? The child is not dead but asleep." And they ridiculed him. Then he put them all out. He took along the child's father and mother and those who were with him and entered the room where the child was. He took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." The girl, a child of 12, arose immediately and walked around. At that, they were utterly astounded. He gave strict orders that no one should know this, and said that she should be given something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord.
Good morning, everyone. Good enough. Desperate people do desperate things. Don't you think this is so? This is what happens in the two stories of healing of this Sunday's gospel. In the first story, the desperate thing that desperate Jairus did was going down on his knees to beg Jesus to heal his 12-year-old daughter. In the second story, the desperate move the woman with hemorrhage the woman with hemorrhage for 12 years did was to fearlessly break the law of exclusion and isolation and join the crowd in order to touch Jesus. But what's desperate in what Jairus did? Going down on his knees was necessary for the sake of his child. But as a synagogue official, he didn't have to do it. He was a VIP in the locality. You know, the synagogue is like the Holy Family Catholic Church. It's a big place, and it's the center of the life of the community. He was revered in his social status. He could be wealthy. He was a Jewish leader. And a Jewish leader bowing to Jesus, who is suspected by many religious elders as an impostor, as a fake one claiming to be the Messiah. And what's desperate in the woman's being fearless? You know, if we only understand what this woman was going through, being afflicted with hemorrhage for 12 long years. She was considered as ritually, ceremonially unclean due to her illness. The illness of this discharge of blood. I imagine that she must have covered her face in order not to be recognized by the people, or she be bullied and even thrown away. She was a social outcast, like the lepers, not allowed to touch people, or people become unclean. She traveled, according to one biblical scholar, 30 miles to reach Capernaum. She spent all her wealth with many doctors, with no alleviation or cure. Her isolation was almost unbearable. Clearly, she was an outsider, a person who does not count, who does not belong. Their despair is expressed in their words. For Jairus, "My daughter is at the point of death. Please come, lay your hands on her, that she may get well and live." For the woman, "If I but touch his clothes, I shall be healed." No iota of doubt in her words. Another biblical scholar said that, you know what really happened to the healing of the woman was one of a stolen miracle. I did not think of it at first, but it's true. What happened to her can be considered as a stolen miracle. Jesus noticed power has gone out of him. And this, I would like to think that this was the first time that a healing like this happens without Jesus initiating or intending or consenting to it first. This is the only healing incident that a healing takes place even before Jesus becomes aware of it. The words of the woman, "If I could only touch his clothes, I shall be made well." Immediately, her flow of blood dried up. Only then, Jesus noticed power has gone out of him. Surprised himself, Jesus said to the woman, "Daughter, your faith has saved you." Brothers and sisters, both stories show the preeminence and power of faith in Jesus. To the woman, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction." Jesus confirmed the uncompromising faith of the woman. And to Jairus, "Do not be afraid, just have faith." Jesus reminded Jairus not to falter in his faith. In both cases, faith is an indispensable prerequisite for our needs to be given to us. How many of us here were in the same desperate situations as Jairus and the woman who suffered hemorrhage for 12 long years? I too was in many desperate situations through these years, but there was one particular desperate situation which happened in February of 2015, some 3 years ago, when my father at the age of 88 needed to have a surgery. He was afflicted with pseudoaneurysm in his right thigh as a result when he accidentally fell. And because of the internal bleeding, he had to undergo a surgery to stop it. A very risky but necessary procedure given his old age. The procedure went on for 5 hours. And for us, his family, it was like eternity waiting. But thank God, the surgery was successful. But as soon as he went out of the recovery room, a bleeding occurred quite profusely and would not stop. The doctors tried to avert the situation but could do nothing except the option to redo the procedure, but which is more risky this time, and the chances my father would not make it was extremely high. The doctors were not even willing to take the risk. They said with resignation that at this time, only God and miracle can save my father. And knowing I was a priest, they told me maybe my prayers can save my father. I was in panic. I was in tears. I was overwhelmed by fear, anxiety. And I did not know what to do, much more to believe that a miracle was possible. But at the same time, I knew my only refuge is prayer. Earnest prayer. Most sincere prayer. So I went to my father in tears, praying. And suddenly, I remember this woman in today's gospel, suffering from hemorrhage for 12 long years. And I remember her words very vividly. If I could only touch his clothes, I shall be healed. And I prayed the same prayer over and over and over again for my father in my most earnest way, never taking off my eyes and my heart from Jesus and this woman. And about 30 minutes went by. The doctors were surprised that the bleeding slowed down and eventually stopped. And my father recovered. My family was jubilant. The doctors were shaking in disbelief. And I was extremely happy, and grateful.